A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the three key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Hello and welcome back again to Tracking Trends. America has entered the war with Iran. Iran has said it will retaliate against every American interest, including the American citizens in the region. What's bothering everyone, what's on top of mind of everyone, is what happens now. What will America do next? How will Iran's retaliatory action pan out? What are the Europeans thinking? More importantly, how is China going to respond? How is Russia going to respond? Both of them have been steadfastly with Iran. And then there are Iran's allies and foes in the Middle East region. How all of these things are going to pan out in days and hours to come. And invariably and finally, how would all these developments impact India, its geopolitical interests, as well as its economic interests? Today, we are going to talk about all of these things and seek answers with our expert in the studio, Mr. Pramit Chaudhury, who heads the India practice of Eurasia Group. Pramit, welcome back again. What happens now? Start with, we'll come to the Americans a little later. Let's first start with Iran has said it would retaliate. What are the options before Iran? What kind of what would be the likely nature of Iranian retaliation? Let's start with that.
So Iran can, in theory, fire it. It still has ballistic missiles. Its arsenal is severely eroded, but depending on the estimates that there are somewhere between 30 to 40% of its missiles are still in existence, and it can, in theory, hit the American fleet in naval base in Bahrain. There are American military facilities in Qatar, and of course there are many in the Persian Gulf region. It could carry out terrorist attacks against American embassies, potentially even in the United States itself. That's not unusual for Iran. They've done that before. But it's noticeable that already their retaliation that has been carried out has been solely targeting Israel. They've continued to hit at Israel, but they have not so far hit anything against the United States. And I think for the time being, that will continue. Iran really would like to, I think Iran will judge to see whether or not America will continue to be involved in the war, or will it pull out? Of course, the other option is that the Majlis of Iran has already passed a resolution calling for the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, but that does not matter until the Supreme Council actually endorses that. That is a little bit more difficult. The threat of closure, in other words, we will fire missiles at any ship that passes through, is obviously there, but that would almost certainly draw America into a larger intervention in Iran, which I think right now they prefer to try to avoid.
So you said American bases and interests in the region. I believe there are more than a dozen countries where in the Middle East where the Americans have their military bases. Is that right? More than a dozen?
I mean, it depends what you define as a base. They have really one big one in Bahrain, one in Qatar, They have facilities in various other parts of the
Kuwait?
Middle East. Kuwait, yes, because that's a consequence of. But even that is now is much smaller since they pulled out of Iraq.
Do they have
Uh,
something in Oman?
Sorry,
Oman?
Oman, yes, but Oman is. But the point is that for Iran is, do you want to fire missiles at countries that at presently are either friendly, like Qatar, or neutral in the present in the
Yeah,
present.
I'm asking because these are the countries which are kind of just around Iran.
True, but you are essentially then attacking those countries as well. It's not just attacking an American facility. You will effectively be bombing Bahrain or Qatar. Those are countries that Qatar, in particular, has a very close relationship with Iran, and even Saudi countries like Saudi Arabia and Oman have kept at least a degree of neutrality with Iran. So I doubt that Iran would like to go down that path, including the fact that it's very unlikely they'll be up to hit anything, because these will obviously be very heavily defended with anti-defense systems, probably even superior to what the Israelis have, in which case they're very unlikely to be able to hit anything.
So even if they are American interests, but they are located in a country that is either friendly or has a neutral stance vis-a-vis Iran, and therefore Iran would think twice before making them a target, right?
Yeah, because the consequences would be considerable, i.e., these countries might change, but more importantly, America would then carry out much deeper retaliation, including against Iranian military sites, which so far they have not done. But the actual impact in America would probably be very minimal.
Now, let's come to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran's parliament has made that decision. Now, as you said, it has to be now approved by the Security Council. So, is there a chance that the Security Council might say, hold on to it? Or is that also, is that, the fact that the parliament passed that yesterday and the council hasn't made any decision yet? So there is a little bit of window for any negotiations, because we believe the Americans have asked the Chinese to persuade Iran not to do that.
Well, I
The
think right
European.
now yeah. Well, but now, yes, I think it's just a signal from Iran that we have the ability to cause disruptions to the international economy in terms of oil flows, and to some degree gas flows as well. And these are things that you need to consider. And so, therefore, yes, it's opening up a door for some sort of diplomatic effort, at least regarding continued American intervention. But it's a game that they have to be careful about, because to actually close Straits of Hormuz again will not only impact some of their production and their sales, it will also impact countries like very friendly countries like Iraq. They're basically the last Shia country that they still maintain some degree of influence over, as well as, of course, as neutral countries like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So this will be a double-edged sword for them to do. But right now, I think it's more about signaling a threat and trying to force other countries, as you mentioned, China, for example, which is the biggest buyer of oil from Iran, to intervene, to try to at least intervene with the United States more than anybody else.
Why? I mean, let's stay a little bit on this. Why is the Strait of Hormuz economically so important? So, in terms of numbers, quantity, what's the kind of share of oil shipments that pass through this narrow channel?
Oh, it's a good question. Now, the latest figures, if I'm correct, and I could be a little off here, about 40% of world's oil, and about the same amount of natural gas flows through the Straits of Hormuz. There have been some alternative pipelines that do go around the Strait of Hormuz, but I think for the most part, you're still looking at about that much oil and gas coming through, because you have virtually all of Iraq's production, Kuwait's production, most of Saudi Arabia's production, and Qatar's natural gas production, plus a bit of Iran's production, all have to pass through the Straits of Hormuz. As of now, incidentally, if you were to look at a map of tankers tracking through the Hormuz, there has been no disruption whatsoever. Not even one ship has stopped sailing through. They know that this is partly a signaling game, and they're waiting to see whether Iran will actually be bothered to take serious action. But they have until the Supreme Council actually passes something. But again, remember, even if Iran says it will block the Straits of Hormuz, America could easily bring in the naval and air capacity to say that we'll safeguard it. But generally, the point is most ships will immediately stop sailing. They'll just say this
Yeah.
is too dangerous for us. Insurance costs alone would skyrocket, premiums would skyrocket.
Yeah. If this conflict prolongs and the Strait of Hormuz indeed gets closed, there would be serious consequences for India. We'll talk about it when we come to that. But now let's move on to how do you assess the Europeans' response? Because they have been at the center of trying to mediate a peace deal, trying to get Iran to make certain commitments about its nuclear weapons program. Now, all of that has got derailed. And how are the Europeans responding? Because
Well, the
we,
Europeans, you've seen the statements already. Keir Starmer, Macron have said that Iran's nuclear program is a danger, but they would like but now that they would like to see diplomacy come into play. But the point is that the Europeans have no influence because for Iran the problem is Israel, and the only country that has the capacity to tell Israel to pull back is the United States, and the only country that has the ability to threaten Iran further or take the attack further is the United States. So while it's useful to get the Europeans to make statements, the Iranians know full well that the only country that really matters or capital that matters is Washington. And it also happens to be run by an administration of President Donald Trump's that holds the Europeans in complete contempt. So therefore, yes, it's nice to have the Europeans say diplomacy is good, but they also know that that has no impact whatsoever on the two main players that they are concerned about, the United States and Israel.
so in the days to come, no matter what they say, we can safely say how things will shape up. The Europeans may have less of a bearing on that, and since it's going to be Washington D.C. all the way, and how Washington D.C. now onward responds will also depend on how Beijing and Moscow are weighing in, right? So now let's move to China and Russia. What have they said so far? What has been their stance, and what they might want to do in this?
So neither China and Russia, while they've given, China has probably provided, we have reports of military supply chains from China flying into Tajikistan and then flying onwards, westwards towards Iran and then disappearing, i.e. they're switching off their transponders. So we assume military supplies are going there, though not too much, given that you can't carry that much in an aircraft. Russia might be providing, it's not clear, that's not clear. But for the most part, I think Russia, because it's consumed by the war in Ukraine, doesn't really have surplus capacity to provide. For Iran, I think the game is, yes, can get China and Russia to put diplomatic pressure on Trump. But again, it's not clear the Trump administration particularly cares what China says. There's a lot of China hostility to China. Russia, ironically, given Trump takes Vladimir Putin very seriously, has a little bit more influence. But for the most part, these are two countries that are very focused almost only on the oil flows and oil supplies. But they have not intervened to try to help Iran, for example, with the Israeli attack, though they both, China at least has denounced them. Neither one really wants to get involved militarily. In fact, almost certainly not. And neither country wants to get involved against the United States. Simply too powerful a nation militarily for them to do so.
Pramit, you said neither country wants to get militarily involved, but the three nuclear sites that the Americans bombed, Fordow, which is one of the most important of all nuclear bases that they have, Natanz and Isfahan. In many of these nuclear facilities, some of these have been developed with the help of the Chinese and the Russians in the past. Many of them have Russians and Chinese engaged there, right? Their
Very
scientists.
unlikely. I don't think the Iranians allow any foreigners into their
The
nuclear.
Russians, because the Russians made a statement, our engineers are going to be there. They're not going to leave that place.
But they may be well, it depends. I don't think they'll be in those core nuclear facilities. They may be in some, there are about 150 to 200 nuclear facilities that many of which are involved in just nuclear power production that are not necessarily in part of the core of Iran's nuclear deterrent. It's very unlikely the Iranians will allow foreigners into that. Most countries do not allow foreigners into the heart of their nuclear weapons facilities. But yes, in some of the places where, for example, you have a nuclear power plant that maybe, or some that is producing uranium or plutonium or some variety and enriched, and then you might use an enrichment facility which uses some systems, foreign equipment, Russian in this case. China tends to be very careful to stay out of these things. Even with Pakistan's nuclear program, the Chinese have kept a bit of a distance as far as their individuals are concerned. So we'll see, but I don't think that is. But ultimately, that doesn't matter as far as the bombing is concerned. If the Americans were to hit and kill some Russians, what would Russia do? File a protest? But other than that, they would not be interested in going any further.
So the Iranian foreign minister was in Moscow yesterday and probably is continuing to be there as we speak. We don't know what has come out of those meetings. He was there, I believe, to meet President Putin. Do we have any information on what has come out of it? Because Russia hasn't said much as of now.
So I think the Iranian game would be only to sit down and try to explain their position, urge the Russians to support them in any little way they can. But I would argue if there is any way that Russia could do anything, is to say, can you influence the United States to stay out of this, or send a message to America that you need to stay out of this war, that you've done this and we're fine, move on. But the real game is, and potentially, can Russia influence Israel? They don't have much influence on Israel. The core of the Iranian policy now would be, in my view, the Americans have carried out these attacks. You've seen American officials, including J.D. Vance, Haggart, say, we've carried out the attacks on the nuclear facilities. We have set back Iran's nuclear program. It's over for the Americans. That's all our only interest. The problem in this, the joker in the pack is Trump himself. And of course, all the other American officials, we are not interested in regime change, and we are only concerned about the nuclear program of Iran. Trump has gone back and forth on this, and he just recently tweeted, for example, that, well, who knows, maybe a regime change could happen. But here's a problem: is he cannot get American troops on the ground, and a larger American invasion will simply be impossible for him. And it is his own base, his own political base, the so-called MAGA crowd, who are the most opposed to the idea of getting involved. He's already facing a lot of criticism from the right wing of his own party, who's saying that we were elected, you were elected, and we gave you our votes on the belief that you would never get us involved in the Middle East war. So Trump has been going back and forth, and I think it's you can almost say it's a struggle between Benjamin Netanyahu urging him to go on, and his own right wing of his own party, and I would say his own instincts. He tends not to want to get involved, and he's often said that military involvement of America in larger wars has been a huge mistake. I think for Trump, the story is, given his strange obsession with getting a Nobel Peace Prize, is in fact quite the opposite. Can I act as an intermediary to eventually end this conflict in a certain way? But he doesn't really have the skills to do so, and obviously the Iranians, I suspect, would say would reject any such idea. So for the Iranian story, or anybody's story in this war right now, is affecting Trump himself, and to a lesser degree his own administration. Because the instincts in his administration are, we've done enough, we pull out. Maybe one more round of attacks on the nuclear facilities as they carry out an assessment of how much damage has been done. But that's basically it. And it's noticeable that they've carefully avoided hitting any military sites. And that, I think, will be Iran's primary objective. Get the Americans to basically say our war with Iran is over, and then see what happens, what they can do with the Israelis.
How much? I mean, Trump said they obliterated the three nuclear facilities that they attacked, but the Pentagon and others in the White House, they seem to be saying that we are waiting for an assessment of the damage.
Which is
And
what you would expect. Trump would go a little too far,
Mhm.
but it was basically the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Keynes.
Mhm.
His briefing, I think, was the best, and it was very clear and very technically detailed. And he said exactly that. He says we've hit the targets, but we will now assess whether or not we have done a sufficient damage, which is why I say the door is still open for another round of American strikes on some of those targets. In
Mhm.
addition, we know that the Iranians had announced that they had another enrichment facility or nuclear facility, and had just begun negotiating with the IEA about opening that up for inspection. Obviously, the Israelis then attacked, and so we do not know where that other facility is. And I believe there is another facility near Isfahan,
Mhm.
which for some reason has not been struck yet. So we'll see. There are two other facilities that are still, if you wish, in play. But it's possible the first one, nobody knows where that is.
Mhm. Let's I mean, we will also touch upon how what Trump has done, where does that leave various institutions and frameworks that we have evolved over the past 7 or 8 decades in the space of global diplomacy. I mean, he has literally rendered all of them irrelevant. But before that, let's just quickly, in the light of what you have described about Strait of Hormuz, the likelihood of the conflict prolonging for some more time, and the lack of clarity that we have, how all of that affects India, its economy, the sentiments in the market, the sentiments of investors.
So right now, the markets, I would argue, while they've been mildly affected, are looking upon this as well. If it's a limited American strike, it does not matter. This does not affect nuclear attacks on nuclear facilities will not bother the market. That has no interest. That has no impact on the larger economy. At present, I think the consensus is that regime change is not going to be happening, and I don't even think Israel itself sees that as a feasible target. It may happen on its own if Iran were to implode, but I don't see that happening. It'll be, at best, a change of factions within the Islamic revolutionary political system. Um, so none of those are seem to be like the only question. Therefore, Iran's oil production by itself is not important. There is sufficient additional capacity, especially in Saudi Arabia, to compensate for Iran. It doesn't leave much leeway after that, of course, but there is sufficient leeway to compensate. And you'll notice oil prices have not actually risen that much. I believe the last time I saw was $6 to $7, which is not very much given the issue. So again, the closure of the Straits of Hormuz or potentially an Iranian attack on Saudi Arabian facilities like Abqaiq would be the ones that would everybody be watching for on that front. We haven't reached that stage yet. And as I said, for Iran, the question is if we were to carry out something that would genuinely disrupt the international oil markets on that scale, to actually block the flow of oil, besides being affected ourselves, it would probably then trigger much larger American intervention. It would also anger China, which would say that we are the biggest buyers of oil from you, and this does not help us, our economy as well. So that is, I think, the last possible action from. It's more about threatening to do so, and then trying to see if that gives you diplomatic leverage and potentially even influence President Trump and his decisions.
But at a time when oil prices were softening, general inflation rate was coming down, and the central bank was actually encouraged to go for a surprise CRR cut and a higher than expected cut in its benchmark lending rate. Now, there was optimism that maybe investment would pick up, maybe growth would accelerate in the months to come. So this comes as a dampener as far as India's economic prospects are concerned in the immediate term, right? Would you
Well, it
say that?
depends. The primary reason that CPI is falling in India is food. Food prices are collapsing, and that's largely because we're not only have we got a good harvest, we're probably going to get a massive harvest this year. So that is still going to that is not affected by what's happening in the Gulf. Yes, oil prices will be an issue, but keep in mind that, as I said, so far oil prices have not risen very high. I mean, well, $6 to $7 is well within our ability to absorb. On top of that, we are getting Russian oil at even lower prices than normal. We are now being able to import Russian oil at almost $50 a barrel, which is almost $20 less than what's going in the market. That might rise a bit, but for various reasons, Russia has been shipping oil at a lower price than expected. So at present, I don't think we're particularly bothered. The game is whether this war extends for a very long period of time. Even then, $70, $75 a barrel is absorbable. The other issue would be, I think, was, as I mentioned, a possibility of the actual closure of the Straits of Hormuz, which remains at present. That's the final blow if for Iran, but that would be assuming that they have feel they have no other options left, and want to just inflict enormous pain on the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I was bringing in RBI was because the central bank particularly doesn't make its rate decisions on the basis of inflation, rather on the basis of inflationary expectations. So if this uncertainty prolongs, and if there are uncertainty, if oil prices begin to climb back, they fuel inflationary expectations. So going forward, there could be difficulties or on the part of the central bank to have a more accommodative stance or shift back to an accommodative stance, which is what they had announced, and they went back. Uh, but also Indian exports, what happens to them? Because Indian exports have been struggling. Now, as you said, insurance costs are going to go up, transportation freight costs are going to go up. Are we likely to be affected?
Again, depends on the length of time and whether or not the Hormuz Straits are shut. If the Hormuz Straits are not shut, our exports to the Gulf, and this is not Iran. Iran is not a major trading partner of ours, but it is basically Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Basically, UAE is the primary trading partner we have. That would be affected. I mean, we would have to. That is the Persian Gulf. The Gulf area is probably our largest trading export zone, and our largest trading partner. Those will be affected, but again, not if it's about, let's say, even a 1 month, 2 month period, not really all that much. And there can be some trade diversion in other direction. You can ship via Jeddah rather than via Dubai, for example. The cost goes up and it becomes more difficult. You could also ship via Duqm in Oman, various other places. UAE, however, is very isolated. It would be difficult to move things there. So yes, our exports will be affected, but only, I repeat, only if this is an extended ended problem. Keep in mind, we've had a number of major disruptions in the international logistics and shipping system repeatedly. In fact, it's almost becoming a norm. But there was the Ukraine war, the Houthis, Red Sea. In fact, the Houthis cutting off the Red Sea for such an extended period of time was in many ways much more damaging to our exports than this conflict has been so far. We had shortages of containers. The shipping costs dramatically increased because they had to go via the Cape of Good Hope, and so on. So that was and it went on and on. I mean, the Houthis still haven't really been tamed. And that the Houthis, remember, are Iranian supported. In theory, if Iran were to try to do something, it would bring the Houthis back into play, though Red Sea traffic continues to be at pretty low levels.
I mean, that's a possibility. Some people have talked about that Iran's allies, like the Houthis and the Shia groups in Iraq, they may also act in support of Iran, and if that happens, it makes things worse. So, as you said, so India's interests are best protected only if the Strait of Hormuz is not closed. only if this conflict does not extend for very long. And those are two very big ifs, and they depend on now they don't depend on any of the institutions that we have had in the past to intervene in these things, because Trump has completely ignored the UN Charter. He has thrown the NPT out of the window. He hasn't bothered about the Europeans. He hasn't even bothered about his own Congress, right? So here is a man who acts in a very different way. So, what are the possible scenarios specific to Trump and how he will move, and who would be the biggest influencers on him? How all of that is going to pan out very quickly. Let's kind of sum up with that.
Well, first, I don't think Trump is doing anything that no other previous American administration has done. America does not go to the UN Security Council for missile attacks. They've carried out missile attacks in the Middle East many, many times before. Clinton administration carried them out, so did the Bush. They've only gone to the UN if it's a full-scale invasion, and made it also very clear that even if they don't get UN approval, they will still go ahead. That is irrelevant to them. They like it, and the first Bush administration obviously got that support over the Kuwait invasion. They didn't get it in the next Bush administration. They still went in. It didn't make any difference. Great power or superpowers do not have to abide by the UN Security Council. That is not a requirement. That's I should note. Even India can defy the Security Council when it wants to. It's big enough now already to do so. Second, I don't think, and again, the US Congress, if there is no deliberate war involved, the War Resolutions Act does not have to be imposed. It gives the president a huge amount of leeway to carry out, quote, police actions for national security. Again, Trump is not doing anything unusual on that front. The NPT, I don't see why the NPT is involved here. The NPT is very much in force. It is the problem for Iran now is that they have abided by the NPT at least in spirit. They have come very close to violating it a few times. But otherwise, yes, the question for Iran is whether it makes sense to continue with the NPT. I would argue the only reason that they had maintained their position within the NPT and abided to some degree by IAEA inspections, though they've occasionally flouted that as well, has been the assumption that they could come to some sort of a diplomatic resolution about their, should we say, nascent nuclear program under the original JCPOA, a revival of the JCPOA. Trump seems to have destroyed that. Yes, that I agree. It was not in great shape. But he's basically given up, it seems, so far given up on a diplomatic effort. And for Iran, the game is, does this make any more sense? They've threatened in the past to withdraw from the NPT, or talked about it, never gone ahead. So we'll see. Maybe one of the consequences of this conflict is that Iran eventually gives up on the NPT. That is where the Europeans, potentially even the Russians or Chinese, may have some influence, where they'll come in and say, look, this one assumes the Americans withdraw, and there'll at least be some resolution on the Israeli side, that stay with the NPT and the JCPOA. Otherwise, the Israelis are going to have to come back and attack you again 5 years from now or 10 years from now.
Thank you. I think we covered a lot of issues, and the truth is only Iran and US know where and how things will pan out from now. And I think if there's only one man who has answers, or who may not even have the answer, is Donald Trump. So let's wait and watch. Let's hope that good sense prevails and things come to an end as early as possible. Thank you very much for your time, Pramit. Thank you, audience, for watching us. If you have liked our conversations, please use the comment box to share your feedback. Like the video, share our channel, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pramit, once again.
Thank you.